Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Unlocking Earth Heat, Geothermal District Heating and Cooling. I'm gonna wait maybe one small minute as I see we still have many people connecting, and then we can start this webinar. I see we have all our participants online already, so that is great. All right. As we need to keep track with time, I suggest we still start, and we will have our participants slowly connecting with their coffee along the way. Welcome everyone to our webinar, the joint webinar between Euroheat and Power and EGEC on unlocking Earth heat, geothermal district heating and cooling, what you would call basically the heat under your feet. I'm Aurélie Beauvais, the Managing Director of Euroheat and Power, and it will be my great pleasure today to moderate this webinar and to give the floor to our great lineup of panelists. As you know, we have said it enough probably already. Maybe there is no such thing as saying it enough. Heating and cooling is today half of the European energy demand. 1/3 of the total energy demand in Europe today is only dedicated to space heating and cooling and hot water. And more than 70% of this supply today is coming from fossil fuels. So as we are in a pivotal moment for the EU, where we need to accelerate the fight against climate change, but also really put up a gear when it comes to defossilizing our industry, the decarbonization of heating and cooling is really coming up as a major issue for the next decade that the European Union will need to work on. With regards to that, it's a good time to shed light on all the good solutions and resources that the European Union has at hand to drive forward this agenda. And this is where we come into the play with geothermal district heating in particular. The potential of Earth energy, geothermal, is far greater than the ones that we are currently using. That is very good news for the European Union. We believe that 25% of the EU heating and cooling needs could be covered by geothermal energy from 2035 if we were to step up our efforts in Europe. We already have a lot of countries which have invested in geothermal and district heating systems and are already exploiting these resources to deliver affordable and decarbonized heat to commercial buildings and households. Geothermal district heating is a very versatile and efficient technology which can enable the recovery of various types of geothermal sources. We will deep dive into it later. And we have this increasing momentum around geothermal energy today in Europe with an INE report from the European Parliament, which is currently being developed. And we're very happy to have the shadow rapporteur from this INE report, Mr. Nis Fuzang, which will deliver a keynote speech later in few minutes. So very happy to be here today. We have 1 hour and a half ahead of us to discuss. I will take the time to introduce properly the great speakers that we have for our panel discussion. But first, we will start with 2 introductory speech from Nis Fuzang, member of the European Parliament, and then Mathieu Balu, a policy advisor at DG Ener. Niels, I will start with you, shadow rapporteur of the geothermal INE report, but also many other hats you've had in the past years, also to drive forward the heating and cooling, decarbonization, and energy transition at large. Thank you so much for being with us today. And the floor is all yours to tell us more about what you are going to do right now with regards to geothermal district heating.
Thank you very much, Aurélie. I hope you can hear me and see me. It's a pleasure to be here with you at this important moment for geothermal energy. We are, as you mentioned, negotiating a new report, an initiative report in the European Parliament, putting geothermal energy on the agenda. And I hope we can use this report to really make way forward when it comes to promoting the policy tools we need for having more geothermal energy in Europe. I will say that from my point of view, something which is very important and which troubles me and which I think should trouble all of us is that we in the European Union are still dependent on fossil fuels imports from Russia. The war in Ukraine is more than 1.5 years old, and we decided to phase out Russian oil and gas, but we are not there yet. LNG gas is being shipped in ever greater numbers, and Russian oil is entering the EU harbors through India, even though we have sanctions, but this happens still, as Der Spiegel reported recently. Natural gas prices can be affected. Furthermore, gas prices can be affected by the possibility of strikes. We've seen that a recent strike in Australia had the consequence that the gas prices jumped 10%. So it's not cheap either to be dependent. It's not good for our security, obviously, but it's not a good business either. So with the Fit for 55 package, we set some ambitious goals, I would say, for decarbonization of our energy system, the rollout of renewables and more energy efficiency. This will not come easily. We are obviously not there, but now we have the targets and we need the tools to get rid of Russian oil and gas and to have a more secure, stable and affordable energy for our citizens. And this is where I think that geothermal energy can play a paramount role. The EU does not have enough energy itself right now. That is the hard truth, and that is what we are trying to change. We need the EU to be leading on circular economy, energy efficiency, knowledge, and skills for this to change. District heating and cooling is a method, technology that I think will be extremely important in this effort. During the crisis, the energy crisis, district heating and cooling proved to be resilient and delivered stable prices. And this was not at least the case in Denmark, where I'm from. This is my home country, where we have a lot of district heating compared to most countries. Therefore, I think that we must roll out district heating and cooling in as many municipalities in the EU as possible. And with the Directive for Energy Efficiency that we adopted recently, that I was leading as rapporteur, lead negotiator, we managed to make a requirement for all the municipalities with more than 45,000 people to have district heating, to have heating and cooling plans. So they need to make plans for how they see that we can deliver heating and cooling to the people in the municipality. And here they need to consider whether district heating can be a possibility. We also set requirements in the Energy Efficiency Directive for decarbonization decarbonizing of the district heating and cooling systems. So we will not accept that we keep on having district heating and cooling systems that are run on fossil energy. We can change it to renewable energy. Again, this is where I think geothermal energy can play a very important role. 50% of all energy use in the EU is for heating and cooling, and more than 70% of that energy is still fossil, the energy that we use for heating and cooling. That's according to the European Commission. The geothermal industry, that is a lot of you guys, estimates, as Aurélie mentioned, that geothermal energy can supply more than 25% of the heating and cooling consumed in Europe, and over 10% of electricity. And that's why we need to promote it, because geothermal energy can go into the district heating and cooling systems. It is a renewable energy, it is a stable energy, and it is an affordable energy. So we can solve a lot of our problems. That's what I'm getting at here, that we have these problems with dependency on fossil fuel imports from foreign powers, notably Russia. We want to get rid of it. We want to get rid of it in a way where we make it a green solution. And that is why I would say we need more district heating and cooling, and we need geothermal energy to play a very important role in that district heating and cooling, because of the many benefits when it comes to the climate and the affordability and the independency of foreign powers that this will provide. We have a huge potential. We don't use it today. We should start using it, and that's basically, I think, the purpose of this report we're doing in the European Parliament, to set this agenda, to say, look, it is actually ridiculous that we don't use all this potential that we have. Let's try to get started. We say that we are negotiating right now this report, so let's see how it ends. But I think I can say that I think the shadow rapporteurs and the rapporteur are pretty much aligned that this geothermal energy is something that is a big potential, and we need to do more to use it. I think we will agree, and we will find solutions or common ground in the report. That is my feeling right now. I can tell you that my staff is right now at a technical meeting with the other shadow and rapporteur staff. And I think that as far as I hear, things are going well. One of the things I think we should say in the report is that we need a mapping of subsurface data in the EU, and I think the European Commission could play a helpful role here. Basically, we need to know where the potential is. Some places we have a lot of potential, some places we don't. And if we don't have the access to the data, there is a lot of data out there, but sometimes it's being monopolized and held by private actors that are not sharing it. And we need to find a balance here, because obviously if you pay a lot of money for creating or establishing some data, you don't want to give it to the rest of the world for free the day after you achieve the data. But I think there needs to be some deadlines for when the data is collected. You cannot monopolize the data forever. It should be public at some point so that we can all use it. And that, I think, is something that we should say in the report. Furthermore, I think we need to have an overview, and I think the Commission could be helpful as well, not only of the subsurface data, but also where the potential in more general terms are for geothermal energy. For example, if there's a lot of excess heat from industry in some cities, maybe we don't need geothermal energy there, but we need it in other places. And I think this overview, we need to do more to work on creating that overview. And I'd be curious to hear what the European Commission thinks that it could play, if it could play a role in creating this overview. I think that lithium extraction is something we'll probably also touch upon in the report. When you make drillings and extract geothermal energy, there will sometimes be a possibility also for extracting lithium. And this is highly relevant. I think we are right now discussing the Critical Raw Materials Act in the ITRE committee and in the EU system. We need more we are dependent on China, for example, when it comes to lithium. If we can extract more in Europe as a byproduct of geothermal extraction, it will be a very good thing. So I think we've set the path in the Renewable Energy Directive and in the Energy Efficiency Directive for a more renewable-based district heating system and energy system as such. We've set requirements in the Energy Efficiency Directive for local heating and cooling plants and for decarbonization of district heating. And I think in all of this, geothermal is really fits very nicely into this because it's renewable and it is a cheap form of energy that can be used in the district heating system. So obviously, I cannot see any reasons for why not to go down this path and try to see if we can use this potential that we're not using today. And honestly, my impression from the European Parliament is that there is a pretty broad agreement that we need to make this happen. So let's see which kind of report we'll make. I think we'll have some clear calls from the European Commission. So I would encourage the Commission to prepare itself for taking some of these initiatives when it comes to data that I'm talking about, when it comes to also making a strategy for geothermal energy, how we can promote it. And also, that's the last thing I would say, the permitting question that we see for many types of renewable energy, that one of the main problems is the permitting is too lengthy, that it takes years and years to get permitting to go ahead with the projects. And here I think we need some standards, some EU standards for permitting for when it comes to geothermal energy, that we make sure that we don't drag it out. We need to be independent of foreign energy as fast as possible. We need to combat climate change as fast as possible. And that's why we need to get the permitting going, of course, with the legitimate respect to environmental concerns, but we need not to drag it out for years and years. That is my encouragement to all of us. I think we will find a broad agreement in Parliament, and I hope the Commission will also play along these tunes. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to be with you here.
Thank you very much, Niels. It was a very, very insightful speech. I think a lot of elements for us to reflect upon after in the panel discussion, but you said it right. And thank you for mentioning also the Energy Efficiency Directive, because it's true that it is really a stepping stone to really put in place this framework, both for the uptake of geothermal sources with this heating and cooling plans at municipal level to identify the resources, and also to push the decarbonization of the district heating and cooling infrastructure. You said it clearly, the path is set, but we need the tools to get rid of Russian gas. And I also liked what you say, why not? It's true that in the EU, we tend to like simple solutions, silver bullets, and maybe in the current context, we need to look rather at the benefit and the value of diversification, the value of harvested all the solutions that we have at hand. And indeed, why not betting on a source like geothermal, which has so much untapped potential, and an infrastructure like district heating and cooling, which is already supplying 67 million European citizens. So it's a great moment for all of us. Thanks a lot, Niels. You had a lot of messages also for the Commission, or question for the Commission. So that's a perfect transition to Mathieu, which is going to give us the perspective on that. I know that you will not be able to stay the full time, Niels, because also, as you mentioned, there are important meetings going on, but thank you again for taking the time, and feel free to stay as long as you can, or see you very soon. And Mathieu, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Aurélie. Good morning, everyone, and thanks to Niels Fuglsang for the great introduction and all the messages to the Commission. Indeed, I would start by stressing how the text adopted already under Fit for 55 show a step change and really a breakthrough moment in terms of ambition. With the agreement on the Renewable Energy Directive, we are setting a target that corresponds to doubling the pace of deployment of renewable energy in the EU for the ongoing decade, probably closer to tripling in terms of renewables in heating and cooling, with the overall target of 42.5% renewables in the whole energy system. We are really looking at a system that will be based on very high shares of renewable energy already by 2030, with an electricity supply that will be largely decarbonized. It means that the focus is not only on deployment. Deployment is, of course, the way to reach those shares, but also on the integration of renewable sources, which means that we have to look at the big numbers, and we have to look also at the technologies and the systems that can allow to integrate those high shares of renewable energy and provide the services to keep that to make sure that this system functions well and at the lowest cost. And that's where the importance of district heating and cooling systems comes into play, and that's where the use of direct renewable heat sources such as geothermal, such as solar thermal, for instance, come into play. With the Renewable Energy Directive, we introduced new targets for the overall renewables use, but of course for renewables in heating and cooling, in district heating, strengthened compared to the previous version of the directive. With that, we really want to provide a clear horizon for investors, saying this is serious, this is there to play. So it was great that the co-legislators reached that agreement now. So we have this in place as a clear foundation. In addition to that, the Renewable Energy Directive includes recognitions of the role of district heating and cooling in energy system integration, with new requirements for better coordination in terms of planning of the energy system. So now the fact that electricity system operators have to take into account in their planning, in their investment plans, the possible role that district heating and cooling can play in providing system services. So we have that on the one hand from the renewables angle. Then the EED, as mentioned by Niels, it really outlines a clear evolution of district heating systems, and it has some dates that will affect the new systems and the newly built heating generation capacity. For instance, from 2030, the newly built heat generation units cannot be based on fossil fuel use. So that's a clear constraint for all the ambitious plans for the development of district heating and cooling in Europe. From 2035, the existing systems no longer be supplied only with fossil fuel. So that those are really hard deadlines that will force the integration of more and more renewable and waste heat sources. And in 2050, we have a clear vision. All the energy supplies to the efficient district heating and cooling system, so the systems that can benefit from state aid, should originate from clean energy sources. So really that's a clear progression. And in addition to that, all the large district heating and cooling system need to establish plans to meet those definitions. Niels mentioned also the local planning requirements. So we already seeing lots of the missing pieces of the puzzle coming into play. Specifically for geothermal, I mean, we see those new targets, and we will probably hear it from the industry players. This coupled to the incentives on state aid, etc., provides confidence to the investors. Look, the European strategy is clear. It has upgraded its system towards 2030. The Renewable Energy Directive includes elements on permitting, so really to remove bottlenecks for the accelerated deployment of for instance, large heat pumps. So a number of renewable energy technologies will already be affected by that. We are working on system integration, as I said. Now, really, it's about the implementation. So we're starting to work with member states to make sure that these new rules that just entered into force will be implemented well. So we are looking at national good practices. We're working with member states to make sure that those are shared across member states. And one strong tool that we have at the moment is the assessment of the draft national integrated energy and climate plans, the NECPs. So all member states had to submit this summer the new generation of their NECPs. Almost all have submitted them now. So the Commission is currently looking into these plans that include all aspects related to climate and energy policies, targets, policies, and measures. Beyond just plans, this is for us an instrument of dialogue with member states. We are looking at how member states are proposing to put themselves in a place to meet the new increased 2030 targets. We're exchanging with them, saying, okay, this is interesting, this is not yet full, their information is missing there, and it's also support to the good implementation of the new rules. Look, this is in the new directive, I don't see it yet in the draft NCP. This should be the form it has. It also allows us to identify good practice, which can be replicated between member states. We see signs of significant increases of ambition compared to the previous NECPs. So these are very good signs, and the Commission will prepare its comments on these national plans. Next to this, there are other ongoing initiatives, legislative, like the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, which will be again another tool towards the decarbonization of the EU building stock. The electricity market design reform, which will give member states tool to reward flexibility services that can typically be provided by all sorts of demand side resources, such as thermal storage that can come from geothermal. The district heating systems there have a strong role to play, and the key is to reward the systems that those the services that those systems can provide. We are working on a heat pump action plan to accelerate the deployment of all types of heat pumps, including geothermal heat pumps, of course, including large heat pumps for industry, for district heating. It will include dimensions on skills, for instance, increased cooperation between the industry, member states, the Commission, to identify gaps, to identify way forwards on various aspects. But of course, most of the work for us now is the good implementation of everything that we have put in place. And I would like to give an example, because there are lots of tools, but sometimes they are partly underused, such as the comprehensive assessments on heating and cooling that member states had to deliver. Those are big plans, and it answers a bit what Niels mentioned before, where member states have to identify all the potentials for sustainable heat, for heat demand, heat supply, and match them. The first generation of those plans was not very fully comprehensive, not complete, and there are more requirements now coming from current legislation, and those tools, if very well used, could be an excellent way to really match those and do that assessment of the resources, the potentials, and the respective potentials of various technologies. So we really want to work, and having useful input from you is an essential component of that work on implementation. So great discussion in the EP on how to accelerate geothermal specifically. We are taking all that as input, of course, in the discussion on implementation, on identifying best practices, and on identifying the gaps, but also in feeding our thinking towards 2040 and the next decade and policy towards that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mathieu. A lot of also very important messages that you brought to the conversation. The complementarity of energy sources and the energy system perspective. Thank you for bringing that also into this conversation, because it's true that when thinking about the decarbonization of Europe's largest energy consuming sector, it does make sense to keep in mind a system perspective, how the complementarity of clean energy sources is going to help also stabilizing the clean heat supply in the long term. And here the contribution of geothermal heat sources is very important to complement other efforts with regards to renewable electricity sources, for example. Thank you also for bringing the heat pump action plan. Indeed, we do need enabling technologies, and heat pumps are also large heat pumps, and they're actually quite crucial when it comes to harvesting a lot of clean heat sources like geothermal energy. You insisted a lot on the implementation. You are right, and I think it would be great to have this conversation focusing on the tools that are needed to have this implementation happening. It's good to have plans and assessments, and some of those elements are in the EED as well as in this tool that you mentioned, Mathieu, the comprehensive assessment for heating and cooling. And we need maybe also to think collectively as how we can make this or strengthen also the strike power of the Commission. What happens if those assessments are done but not followed up? What happens if those assessments are not done? Quid of same repercussions of the national energy and climate plans? It is true that we do have a lot of plans today at European level in different layers. So how do we make them efficient as well on the ground for the industries and the project to happen? That's going to be a very important element of the debate, which we can start actually, I think now, and Mathieu, you will stay with us for the discussion. I'm very happy today to introduce to you our great lineup of speakers for this moderated discussion. We have Asbjørn Hoogstrup, Chief External Relation Officer at Inagi, Jacob Nies, Head of Brussels Office at Stadtwerke München, Philippe Dumas, Secretary General at the European Geothermal Energy Council, Lorraine Devouton, Business Development Executive at ENGIE, and Mathieu, which just spoke before. So let's start. I think our two introductory speeches already gave a lot of food for thought, but sometimes when we are too much among experts, we kind of forget that we may have people in the audience that do not necessarily have a similar understanding than we do about the topic of the discussion, which is also geothermal energy. So I want to ask you, Lorraine, so district heating and cooling, geothermal energy, it's been there for a long time, but before it was not so prominently highlighted in the discussion. So maybe it's a good time to take a step back, and I will just ask you, what are we talking about? What are the projects? How does it look like? What is geothermal district heating and cooling?
Okay, yes, thank you, Aurélie. So as mentioned by Aurélie, Niels and Mathieu, district heating and cooling is the system that allows recover geothermal resources at a large scale. So we can speak about two different types of geothermal, shallow geothermal and deep geothermal projects that address different type of clients with different capacities. So shallow geothermal, it's more for buildings, eco-district with capacities up to 5 megawatt from 500 kilowatts. And deep geothermal, it addresses big areas, like it could be the whole city, and it could go to around 15 megawatt and even more. So into the shallow geothermal, you've got also two different types. You've got the closed loop on the left below the building. It's like, it works like a radiator. So you put tubes underground, it's like an underground radiator. You inject treated water, which circulates into the tubes and which are heated through the natural heat of the ground. Then you've got the other system, an open loop, where you try to recover an aquifer, so the water from the underground, and you could use both heating and cooling, so heating in winter and cooling in summer. So that's great to create synergies. And so there is a production well and a reinjection well. So this is the open loop. Then going to deep geothermal, Depending on the aquifer, and we will see different case studies today. For example, in the Paris Basin, the aquifer is very well known. We could go up to the Dogger layer, but it could be up to the down to the Trias layer. So you go really deeper than for shallow geothermal. Shallow geothermal, you could go down up to 300 meters. Deep, it's more 1.5 kilometers or even more, I think, for München, but you will speak about it later. So through deep geothermal, there is a production well and then a reinjection well that is further from the production. So at underground level, it's 1.5 to 2 kilometers further. And you can recover around 15 megawatts, and the heat is recovered through a heat exchanger on surface. So we don't use into our district heating the water from the underground. The water from the underground remains into the underground. So next slides. So we will see quickly deep geothermal innovative case study. You can see on this example, which has been commissioned in 2021, and we started the authorization permits in 2018 because it was an innovative. We have developed new technology, but otherwise it could go quicker for the permitting. We have innovated on two aspects. First, business model, second, technology. So the business model, why? In this city, in the suburbs of Paris, Vélizy, Villacoublay, there is an existing district heating, which was high pressurized hot water. We converted it to low temperature. So this is also important to recover geothermal energy, is to act on the whole value chain. So, at the condition, the innovative business model we have taken advantage of a law that is a new law that is existing in France. If we produce 100% renewable heat with dedicated joint company with the city, with the shareholder of the city, then we can decide straight to launch the project without the public tenders process. So it goes quicker. And so we created that, we separated production and distribution. This production was a company with the city, and we produce 100% geothermal heat that is supplied to the existing district heating that was converted, as I mentioned, to low temperature. Then the second innovation was the use of multi-drain, because in this specific area, the Dogger layer was not so good. And so you see the fork on the right of the picture on the underground, it helps to benefit from a higher flow rates. Geothermal resources, it's always 2 KPIs, flow rate, temperature. So in that case, we speak about geothermal resources at 64 degrees C and 305 and 50 cubic meters per hour. So next, we could go to the shallow geothermal case studies. Here we address an eco-district. What is interesting is that most often new buildings need, because it's an eco-district with different kind of usage, so you've got at the same time a cooling need and a heating need, and it can be addressed by district heating and also a shallow geothermal open loop. Here we had 2 production wells, 2 reinjection wells. The capacities, you can see all KPIs. I will not enter into detail, but it's around 5 megawatt for heating, 6 megawatt for cooling. And so thanks to a big large-scale heat pump, as mentioned by Aurélie, we could benefit on one side of the heat pump of the heat and of heating, on the other side of the heat pump of cooling at the same time, which allows to create sector integration and to use less electricity for the heat pumps running than if we had two separate systems. So it allows also to be compliant with the zero emission buildings regulation standards, or we've got other kind of standards also in France, but that's the benefit, and we've got a very low carbon footprint.
Thanks a lot, Lorraine. Very extensive. Any remark from our panelist on this presentation? Want to complement something, Asbjørn, maybe? Or no?
No, I think it was a perfect overview. Thank you, Lorraine.
Perfect. So now that we know what we're talking about, let's deep dive into the conversation. We said it before. Why not tapping into this big potential? How big are we talking about, Philippe? We mentioned this figure: 25% of the heating and cooling demand by 2035, from 2% only today. That seems like a huge drop, a huge jump. Actually, is it? The potential that you are looking at as EJEC? What is the potential we can tap into by 2030, 2050? And I have a question on the chat, which is also asking about the potential that you may see with regards to lower temperature geothermal. So yes, could you tell us a bit what is the actual potential, compared also to the current assumptions that were made also with regards to the 2019 climate neutrality modeling, the big modeling exercise from the European Commission back then? How much on track are we compared to the reality on the ground?
Thank you, Ali, for the question, and good morning to all of you. Yes, indeed, what we see is that geothermal today, with district heating, we have 2 to 3% of a market. It's a big market we speak, but it's including 50% of the market. So if we get in the modeling, we can assume to have 500 MTOE on the 1,000 plus MTOE consumed in the European Union for energy. How come we can develop more? Just mentioned by Lorraine, we are not one single technology. We are multiple technology. And you can see just in district heating, you will see a lot of development in different technologies, not only with innovation, but also with different models to use geothermal. So on that, indeed, we see that the potential is huge. Today, what we see, the issue is not the technical potential. When we mention 25%, is just you look at the resource you have, and you have a resource all over Europe, everywhere, or at a deeper depth or at a shallower depth, but you have a potential for systems with district heating everywhere in Europe. Economic potential. Lorraine mentioned some payback time. I assume it was not with the recent Russian gas price, because indeed the payback time is also depending on the market conditions. And it's here, I think, the main issue. Are the market conditions? Do we have a fair competition with gas? Or do we have a fair competition with fossil fuel today to develop our systems? Because the systems is there. It can be economic, but it depends mainly on the market conditions. And what is the issue in the modeling? Because to answer your question already, modeling is not taking into account all these parameters. And we can discuss modeling, and I'm thankful to the Commission that already 5 years ago was recognizing that for heating and cooling, the modeling is not proper. It is not taking account completely the heating and cooling. It's not mentioning how many boilers you have in Europe. So how can you make a modeling if you're not able to know how many boilers you have in Europe? And on that, also, we were looking at the perspective and about gas consumption already from the 2030 perspective in 2010. Every 5 years, the Commission is updating, but it's far from the reality. We are consuming less and less gas, more and more renewable for heating and cooling, and it's not tapped in the systems. Why? Because it's a static model, it's not a dynamic model, and the market is dynamic with new actors, with new business models, with new technologies, and this is where we'll be able to develop further geothermal.
Yes. Thanks a lot, Philippe. I'm sure this is not the first time that Mathieu hears some complaints about the prime models, but it is quite important, because it's true that as we are looking at 2050 decarbonization scenarios, it does have an impact to underestimate a technology in such a size. It is actually invisibilizing in a way some of the critical solutions that we need, and that is really something that we need to address. And one reason why probably it's important to look at this potential is also looking at the countries and regions where it has the highest potential in Europe. Asbjørn, we often hear that a geothermal transition is also a just transition. Is that true? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. I completely agree. I think that when we entered the market, we came from oil and gas. When we entered the market 7 years ago, we looked carefully at where is the most immediate potential. And of course, you have France that Lorraine was speaking about, but then you have a huge potential in Eastern Europe, in Central Europe, including Denmark. And what we see is that we combine existing infrastructure with a renewable energy source that has a fair price and that can provide base load into the system. And when we speak about geothermal, we often speak about very high upfront investment costs, very high capex, and that is indeed true. But when it is established, it is actually very cheap to run. So you get these stable heat prices for 20, 25, 30 years, which is a very good foundation, not just for decarbonizing heat, but for doing it in a just way. And then we start seeing that some of the players that were usually in oil and gas are looking towards geothermal. You had the agreement between Austrian OMV the other day and Vienna. And we are doing the same. We are providing geothermal heat for larger projects as a service. It means that we finance the projects, we take the initial risk related to the subsurface, and we secure 30 years of operation. And in that way, we can actually provide this service also in areas of EU where you might not have the means that you have in the more Nordic and Western part of Europe. So I completely agree already. I think it's closely connected to a just transition.
Thanks a lot, Asbjørn. And to it has a lot of meaning with the just transition. That's interesting what you just said.
Balance.
Also,
yeah,
indeed. This Central Eastern potential, this high affordability that you just mentioned, and we're going to come back to it because I think it's important for the audience to understand that. As a lot of clean techs, you have this high capex, and then you're actually kind of good to supply this affordable energy to the consumers. And also what you mentioned with the business models, for example, heat as a service, which you as ENRG are developing, where players can also more and more take this upfront risk, therefore enabling also municipalities that may not have the resources or the shoulders to take this risk in the first place. Actually talking about municipalities, Jakob is here from Munich with a wonderful background of the city. Can you tell us a bit about that? I mean, Munich is a huge city. How are you envisaging the potential of geothermal to decarbonize your own or expand also your own network? What are the synergies between geothermal energy and district heating? And I see that there is a question on the chat about the typical capital cost of a district heating scheme and how much government can fund and facilitate private investments. Maybe you can touch upon that afterwards to tell us about how you've been financing your own network. Jakob.
Yeah, thank you very much, Aurélie. Thank you for inviting me. A lot of questions. First of all, we are actually very lucky in Munich and its all surroundings. The potential of geothermal energy is about 1 gigawatt. And we will use at least 400 megawatt, rather more. So we are still working on new projects. And our target in the end is that around 80% of our district heating network of Munich is covered by deep geothermal energy. Currently, it's about 20, so there's still a path to go. We are already running the biggest geothermal power plant within the EU and continental Europe. It's about 50 megawatt, and we are currently also constructing an even bigger one. It's about 66 megawatt. And in contrast to Paris, we drill between 3,000 meters to up to 5,000 meters. So the deeper we drill, of course, the hotter the water is. And deep geothermal we use for the district heating network, whereas shallow geothermal energy, so near the surface, we also use for the local heating networks. Yes. What are the synergies between the geothermal energy, you ask? Well, in general, geothermal is, of course, primarily used for district heating, but the energy, which is, for example, not used for heating in the summer, which is also an issue, can be used for cooling production. It was also mentioned already by Angie. So cooling is really a good addition to use the unused energy, and the demand for cooling will definitely raise in times of climate change. We also have to discuss about climate adaptation. So if we are talking about heating, we always have to talk about cooling as well, and because that's really two sides of one coin. Yeah, I hope I answered all questions. Maybe why do we bet on this technology? It's really the location of Munich. We are above this Molasse basin, so we are really lucky. It's like oil. We even use the pumps of the oil industry, but we are pumping hot water between 80 and 140 degrees. And we have also to add, geothermal is super sufficient. So if we invest 1 megawatt electricity to run the pump, and we get out 30 to 40 megawatt energy, heat. In comparison, a heat pump, you invest 1 megawatt electricity and you get out 2 megawatts. So 1 to 2 and 1 to 30 to 40. It's really a super efficient technology. And of course, a lot of investments are needed indeed, because currently we cover 30% of the citizens of Munich by our district heating network. We would like to have around 50 to 60%. And then, of course, 80% geothermal, also waste incineration, also large heat pumps is also an issue. But of course, the peak load, the missing 10 to 20%, then in the winter, it's probably either hydrogen or biomass. And maybe also what has to be added in this context, that if we, for example, hydrogen, if we use hydrogen, it's only 20% of the generation, but 50% of the capacity. So it's really also, that's also a reason that we don't use 100% geothermal energy. It's not economically.
As long as it's 100% renewable and climate neutral, we will be okay. Thank you, Jakob, for that. There are a lot of questions in the chat, so I will try to take some of them, because it means our audience is also very much interested. Just maybe one that can be answered quickly, maybe from whoever wants to take it, but probably the answer is straightforward. How do you determine if a district heating and cooling network can benefit from a geothermal doublet, or can all district heating systems benefit from this integration? Maybe if you look at a different from deep or geothermal, I don't know who wants to start first.
I can start quickly. So
Yeah.
first, the 3 KPIs of the project is the resource. So it depends on the area. Of course, München is a very good area for deep geothermal. Also the Paris Basin and near Bordeaux in France, but not only. There are lots of very interesting areas in Europe, but sometimes we need more accurate data. So first, resources. Then second, district heating, you make the link between production and consumption, so you need the consumptions. So depending if you speak about one building, an eco district, or few buildings, or more than 100, 200 buildings among a city, then you can choose the technology that is adapted, but you can recover, produce heat from a geothermal. The last point, as mentioned by Philippe, is key, is the price competitiveness. And for that, depending on your member state, you have different support schemes. In France, we benefit from subsidies from the heat funds, and also reduce VAT tax if we've got more than 60% renewable energy. And so if I give an example, the city of Arcueil-Gentilly near Paris, they decided to create a new geothermal district heating in 2013. And so it takes time to make the decision, but after it goes quick, 2 years for the entire implementations. But what is important for them is to propose to the citizens at least a little lower price than the current solutions, which were at that time gas price. But now we compare the price of the district heating with either gas or heat pumps. And so we need to be competitive and to have the associated support scheme in order to allow that.
Super
and
clear,
I can
Lauren.
assure Arcueil-Gentilly at that time, they said, oh, only 5% lower than my previous cost, but I would like more. And now they said, we are really happy because due to, as mentioned by Philippe, to the different crises we faced, it's really lower than a standalone solutions.
Of course, the
Aurélie, if you can,
resilience. Yes, Philippe,
no,
go
no,
ahead.
no, just to complement what Lauren, and Lauren maybe, and Ashburn, you can confirm also, Jacob. Maybe what we can recommend, the first thing is we look at indeed the resource potential study, and you have many data available now at regional level, at energy agencies. So contact your energy agencies, your GCAL surveys of the stakeholders, and you see the resource at regional level. Now, after you do your pre-feasibility study, and you see at local level where you are. But that it's easy to do, and you have many stakeholders and market actors able to help you. So that to determine your resource is not a big study at the start. You have many data available to make it.
Perfect. But just to come back on the three aspects of your answer, Lauren, very clear. Area, resources available, consumption, and price competitiveness. And as we look at that, of course, the overall investment cost and the overall project architecture is coming into the play. I have a question on the chat, which is exactly what I wanted to ask you, which is basically, if you look at a geothermal project, could you describe the size of the investment needed, more or less, and how much time is this whole investment and project going to take? Asbjørn?
Yeah, I can be open about that. We are doing a large project in Aarhus. Aarhus is the second largest city of Denmark, approximately 350,000 inhabitants. All of them, or 98% of them, are connected to the district heating network. We are going to drill 17 wells in order for deep geothermal in order to provide approximately 20% of the heat in the city. And just to give you an idea about what prices we're talking about, we have to invest approximately 200 to 250 million euros to make that project happen. And then we do that investment. We also de-risk the subsurface, and then if we can deliver the heat that we have agreed with the district heating network, then they pay a capacity payment for having the heat available for the next 30 years. So it's just to give you an idea. We started 2 years ago, and we haven't, and we spent the first 2 years on permitting, which we have been talking about already. And now we are starting to drill, and we're going to deliver the first heat to the district heating network in 2025. We could have it all ready in 2027 maybe, but it has to be, it has to phase out of other heat sources. In the case of Aarhus, it's imported wood pellets, so that they don't double invest. But it is just to be very open and give you a very precise answer about how many money we're talking about, and the time period for implementation. Of course, a project will benefit if it's larger. So in Aarhus, it's a nice large project of 110 megawatts of heat. If you look at a drilling campaign, the first well pair is much more expensive than well pair number 10.
Aurélie, you are muted, but I
Yes.
can add.
Go
I can
ahead.
add
Thank you.
to Asbjørn. So concerning also the time of the development. So from the first idea to the really putting the power plant into operation, it's on in Munich, it's on average 7 to 10 years. But for example, our currently biggest project, it's Michaelibad, so the really biggest project in Europe, is more than 10 years, rather 15. But it's really also the nature of the project. It's very big. It's 4 doublets. So we are having 4 lines into the ground, getting the hot water out of the ground, and then for the cold water. It's also within a housing area because so it's very complicated project. But I have to say the acceptance is still very high. For example, if I compare, we are a public utility, so we are also providing the public transport of Munich. If we are building a depot for our street railway, what we are currently doing, we have to discuss with the citizen much more about noise, etc. So that's also a good message for geothermal. The challenges of the development, I would say, are, but this was mentioned, is the approval phase, no doubt. And also to find sites eligible for approval within a city with 1.5 million people. So, and for us, in contrast to many other companies, the problem of us is not to get the data because we have it. We did our job several years ago, and now we are working on projects to use the potential. Yes, and maybe also to add something. It's not only about the development; it's also about the running, the operation, and that's there. The challenge in the operating phase is still the pump technology, which I mentioned, as we are using the oil pumps, which are not really best solution because they're used for slimy oil and not for hot water. And also the scaling is also a problem, which is the chalk depositing in the pumps and the heat exchanger with reduced efficiency. So chalk, everyone knows it in the bathroom, the kitchen, you have to clean all the time because water is full of chalk. And in the geothermal energy sector, we have the same problem with our pumps and the heat exchangers.
Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot, Jakob. Lauren, I saw you wanted to say something.
Yeah. It depends on the areas, but a classical deep geothermal project in France for the drilling, it's 4 months. For the permitting, when we already know very well the underground, it's 1 year or 1.5. But the project I showed you, the Villa Coublé, as it was a new technology and a new way of drilling, it took 3 years to obtain the license. And then once a project is decided, like for Arcueil Gentilly, the whole project from when we have been awarded until the commissioning, it was 2 years for the production plant, for the geothermal drilling, production plant, and district heating. And strangely, the difficult part was not the geothermal drilling in that project. It was, as mentioned by Jakob, to work the distribution pipelines to be put into an urban dense areas. Otherwise, drilling, it was only 3-4 months. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. I think this this whole elements about project development phase are very interesting, and I would like us to come back later maybe on the business models that can also help with those big investments, de-risk and finance those projects. But before I do that, just because also permitting was mentioned a lot, I wanted to go back to Mathieu, because we have this heat crisis. We had this Repower EU initiative also, which was already last year, and permitting was one of the elements. So an emergency regulation to allow the emergency implementation of all type of renewable and clean heat projects. So can you tell us a bit, Mathieu, in the Repower EU, what is in there to also accelerate the uptake of geothermal project? And maybe also, because we have very clear targets in terms of developing renewable electricity sources, could we envisage also very clear targets with regards to the uptake of clean and renewable heat sources to face this heat crisis?
So indeed, already almost a year ago, member states agreed on emergency measures to simplify and accelerate the permitting for renewables projects. So indeed, it identified the long duration, the uncertainty about where to go, which areas are best, the likelihood of legal challenges, and the variety of legislative and regulatory frameworks as a big hurdle. So with that regulation, we basically gave member states in this case, they gave themselves the tools to accelerate and simplify permitting for projects by setting the regulation, which has now been enshrined in EU legislation with the new Renewables Directive, sets maximum durations for the procedures, but it also provides for the establishment of so-called renewable acceleration areas. So member states will designate areas for one or more types of renewable energies that are particularly suited to the fast development, because the risk of environmental issues is lower, because the potential for this area is more appropriate, where the permitting times are even shorter, significantly shorter. The new permitting rules also establish the principle of a presumption of overriding public interest of the development of renewable energy, which is meant to preempt some of the legal challenges against projects by saying, look, by default, developing renewable energy, exploiting the resource, connecting it to networks, is in the interest of the public. And then this is basically a toolbox that member states may use and may choose to apply to the resources they want. It also provides for quicker connection of large heat pumps, for instance, to the system, which was also considered as an obstacle. So we're at the moment working with member states to assess how, first, if these rules, if this toolbox has been used, and whether and in what conditions it should be extended. So this assessment process is ongoing is ongoing at the moment. It's useful, and it interacts with a number of other legal requirements related to planning, for instance. So the new elements on local energy plannings come from another direction and really allow to plug in first much more granular understanding of demand and potentials with that permitting, and the comprehensive assessments and so on. It does not fully address some of the concerns that we're hearing from the geothermal sector about the fragmentation of regulation that is typically in mining codes, which are very different depending on the national context, sometimes even subnational. So we have clearly understood that this is a gap at the moment. And the discussion that has started in Parliament is an important input for us to understand how this can be addressed.
Thanks a lot, Mathieu. I think it's a perfect transition to the next phase of our conversation. So indeed, maybe we could have had better tools to tap into the potential of geothermal energy. But what are those tools? What concretely are we looking at in terms of what is needed? What are the biggest challenges that you face, and what is the answer that you need from the European Union and from governments to really have those projects not only happening, but being also attractive, both for the side of the project developer and for the side, of course, of the end consumer who wants to start and take it?
I can start if you want,
Yeah.
Aurélie.
Go ahead.
Looking at the Aarhus project, I would say I was very pleased to hear what you just said, Mathieu. I would echo what has been said on fast-tracking permitting, and this fragmentation of regulation is an issue. What Jakob just spoke about, the preferred access to plots in very urbanized areas. And then you're right, Jakob, that in some parts of Europe, it's easy to get access to subsurface data. In other parts of Europe, not so much. So if you're an international investor, you want easy access to subsurface data everywhere, of course, respecting those who have originated it. But it's easy in Holland. It's difficult in Germany. It's very expensive in Poland. So it's a very, very different picture if you want big companies to invest into this. And then I would add one thing that has not been mentioned yet. But if you want private money to invest and take subsurface risk, then you need to look at the pricing regulation. We also needed to look at that in Denmark when we started out, because you could not get the visibility needed. You could not be sure that you, if everything else went okay, that you could actually get your investment back. And we see some of the same issues in some of the countries where you have tariff-based systems, that you get a tariff for 1 year at a time, and you need to convince your investors, be it pension funds, be it oil companies, whatever, that it is a secure, not a high return investment, but a very secure investment if you want this done in a good way. And I know this is not something that you completely control, Mathieu, but still some guidelines on this could be extremely helpful. And then my last wish, as someone who really wants to do this in all of Europe, more district heating and more modern district heating. Thanks.
Thank you, Asbjørn. So part of this is part of the answer as well. I guess part of the tools are also or need to be also directed at the expansion and the modernization of our existing district heating and cooling infrastructure, so that it's able to incorporate larger shares of geothermal energy. How do we make that happen as well? Do we have all the tools that we need to modernize our district heating and cooling infrastructure today in Europe? Who wants to take it? Maybe Lorraine?
Yeah, I can continue. So for France, maybe the situation is different. We develop geothermal deep or shallow since more than 40 years. And so the schemes that allow that development is first an insurance scheme. It's a public-private insurance scheme that helps to de-risk the project. There is the short-term and the long-term. So the short-term insurance risk, it covers the risk of construction, the capex that Asbjørn mentioned. And so usually the underground is well known, as I mentioned, and the data in France are mostly public, or when a private operator drill a new area, which is less well known, that in the south of France, for example, then it can be subsidized at the condition we let it public. So it's maybe a good practice. So we know the underground. So this insurance scheme in reality is not used a lot. I can remember a project in 2016 by the city of, well, in the south of Paris, where the reinjection well didn't work, and they drilled another one a little further, and it works. So it means that they have drilled one production and 2 reinjection instead of only 1 reinjection well, and they have been reimbursed. Of course, like each insurance, there is a buffer, but if you are covered at 80%, it's quite great. So this is short-term insurance scheme. Long-term, it's in case the resource decreases. In resource I mentioned, we always speak about flow rate and temperature. In reality, as ENGIE, we operate more than 25 geothermal district heating, and over 30 years, we haven't seen a decrease of temperature or flow rate, but it may happen. So this is really a great support scheme, and other support schemes are more classical, like subsidies to capex.
To clarify, Lorraine, indeed, so those insurance schemes, they are more directed towards the geothermal exploration and then exploitation of the resource, or do they also cover the subsequent district heating and cooling infrastructure?
No, only geothermal capex, only geothermal part.
Okay, and with regards to the infrastructure, for example, you mentioned before a project where also the network had to be converted to low temp district heating and cooling network. Are there some challenges to that, or were there some challenges to that, or how did you make it happen?
No, it's something that is well known how to convert. It's just capex and time to implement, but technologies and know-how and studies can be made with digital tools, but it's well known. And in that part of the value chain, we benefit from support scheme subsidies from the heat fund, like it exists also in Germany and other countries. So it's always the same topic. We need to reach a competitive price for the end user. But no, the public-private insurance scheme called the SAF, Philip knows well as well. It's only for the geothermal part, the underground part, the resource, in order to cover the risk that Björn has mentioned. And it's a public and private shared among stakeholders, among a volume of projects.
Thank you, Lorraine. So also quite one of the key challenge also for the infrastructure comes back to this capex intensity. So it's not a new issue in the energy transition. It's always been the case, and it was already the case before with the uptake of renewable electricity sources. So what type of mechanism then, you mentioned this insurance scheme, what type of other measures can be implemented, whether it's from the regulation or even from the business side of things, innovative business models or innovative regulation to make district heating and cooling project financially attractive, to make sure that investors will recover also their investments in the long term, and that consumers will have this competitive supply. Philippe, do you have some examples from other countries that could be insightful?
Yes, thank you. Indeed, a really great question already. So maybe let's start in the phase development of the project. Now, we mentioned data availability. So here, indeed, there's a lot of best practices. And maybe we have to distinguish what is the data to study the potential, no? But after what you have to do as your own exploration study, and maybe sometimes there's confusion. But what are the data available? Mainly from oil and gas. It was public investment to do exploration for oil and gas. And this data should be public and should be given to geothermal, but there's no point on that. So there's a lot to do. I think public-private partnership will be discussed in different phases. It was mentioned by Lauren, for instance, but I think it will be everywhere. And I welcome Lauren also the ENGIE partnership with BRGM and the 3D exploration for Toulouse. I think it's the right tool to do now, to do this public-private partnership. So that for exploration, we will have a lot of, and we need to have this data available, as mentioned by Asborn. Netherlands is the best practice data available for the public. Secondly, as mentioned by Lauren, indeed, when you do geothermal, is like you do for mining, for any resources, including oil and gas, you have to acknowledge the risk profile of your project and to de-risk your project. You have not one tool, you have multiple tools. You have some financial tools like risk insurance mentioned by Lauren, but that is mainly available in brownfield now, where you have already some operation, because the principle of an insurance is the mitigation of the risk between different developers. And that we know perfectly. It has been the game changers in Netherlands, in France. It's coming in Switzerland. It's coming in Hungary. It's coming in Flanders. It's already there. I heard from in Wallonia will launch next year in 2024 the de-risking risk insurance scheme for geothermal. So this is developing all over Europe. And as mentioned by Mathieu, it's one of the new provision in the RES directive that member states have to have these risk mitigation schemes. For the surface, you say, Aurélie, it's capital intensive, but I don't think that the gas infrastructure is not capital intensive. Or oil infrastructure is not capital intensive. So it's all capital intensive. What has been the issue in fossil fuel is that they have decoupled, more or less, the production of energy and the supply and the supply and the distribution of energy, being oil, being gas, and that. And this decoupling of their business model has created the thing that indeed, when you buy the gas, you don't pay the infrastructure. It's not true. It's just it has been paid by another systems. And I think it's a system that we want to see probably also in geothermal to decouple. It was, I think, illustrated by Lorraine in video. Decoupling the subsurface and the surface is two different businesses, two different models. And with that, we'll see indeed the competitivity, because indeed the geothermal source is competitive. What is the challenge is indeed to distribute and to find the clients in your distributing systems. There are some funds available, but that probably in the business model you can cover it.
Just a question with regards also to the competitiveness with fossil fuels. So one element, of course, that we know is uncertain in the future is this gas prices, which today is setting the price not only of gas but also the electricity sector, and it is influencing a lot the level playing field between technologies. When we look at, for example, the type of support schemes that were developed for renewable and solar in the past, you had this feed-in premium system where, in a way, production would be hedged face versus market fluctuations. So if you have a very downward trend, because I don't know, there was a lot of nuclear or hydro energy available back in that days, the renewable installations, wind and solar, could still have a fixed market price to make sure they recover their investments. Is it something that makes sense for geothermal energy to say we want to have operating subsidies that make sure that if gas prices are going low again, very low for X and Y reason, we have this OPEX costs that are being covered? Or is that not at all something that would make sense?
It's a complex question, not easy to answer. But the main difference is heating and cooling and electricity. In electricity, you have a large grid that you can transport electricity, don't be in competition with a nuclear plant, which is far from your production. In heating and cooling, it's a local supply, so you will less face this issue of pricing. But I think I will back what Ashborn was saying, price regulation. And it's here where we see really a new tool interesting. It's one we are promoting in general for some years, is heat purchase agreement, a long-term commitment on the price and the purchase agreement of your price. And that is true for district heating when it's going to supply heating and cooling to buildings, but it will be mainly true for industrial application. And we see here it will be a big market in the future for all clean and renewable energy sources, the supply to heating and cooling, decarbonized to industry. And here, heat purchase agreement will be the solution. But for that, we have an instrument. No, as mentioned by Ashborn, Mathieu, we need some guidance from the European Commission to help member states to have the right design of this scheme, because as for electricity, it will be not easy to design everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Any comment on this particular topic?
Well, if you ask about tools which would be helpful, in the end, request to the European Commission is finding a level playing field between all kinds of renewable energies. Because my impression, and I think I'm not the only one, is that the Commission has a two-class society in terms of renewables. So it's solar and wind, and and then there's some rest we don't want to discuss very deeply. And sorry, I'm very frank, and that's a problem. Example, taxonomy. This is also mentioned in the INI report of the European Parliament. For no reason, geothermal has to do a life cycle analysis. Whereas solar and wind doesn't have it. I totally support that. It doesn't make any sense for solar and wind. So, but why geothermal? And you can see that on other examples as well. So this, generally speaking, would also help to boost geothermal. Yeah, and then a lot of things are already done. So the local heating planning was mentioned. So this really helps also to solve the chicken egg problem. So should we first do a geothermal project, or is there enough heat demand there in the district heating networks? Now, this is really giving investment security, legal certainty. This is very helpful. But generally speaking, this level playing field, it's really an issue what has to be tackled in the next legislative period.
You want to respond to that, Mathieu?
Look, on the
do you have a favorite child?
Exactly. On the two classes, no, of course not. It's been a gradual improvement, and I think that with our new legislation, we can admit that the specific tools dedicated to renewable heat have finally, one might say, but reached a level where we will really move into another dimension. Regarding specific initiatives, let's look at the solar strategy, for instance, that was part of the Repower EU plan. Repower EU is about very quickly replacing fossil fuels, and so there were specific initiatives launched, solar strategy, for instance, but also heat pump action plan, which is about using heat, including from geothermal sources. It's about what can you very quickly deploy in at a very large scale everywhere in the EU to very quickly displace fossil fuels. So that was the point of specific strategies. It's about also new policy has to be based on a clear understanding of the potentials and on the data, and it's something that has been discussed. There are indeed limitations in terms of the understanding of geothermal as a sector and an own entity. About systems, for instance, the delineation is probably not as clear, which makes it difficult to address it specifically. So lots of messages that I've heard are clearly received, and we have to work on addressing the gaps in terms of understanding overall of the sector, of the needs, of the gaps, collecting the best practices from the industry, from specific national contexts, and seeing how this can be better addressed. Yeah, that would be my answer.
Thank you, Mathieu. I mean, it's not an easy question, so thank you for taking it, and thank you also for I think simply being frank on that more needs to be done, and that the European Commission is aware of that, and will most likely try to look at it in the future. We know that we have European elections next year. We know that these elections and the result of these elections are going to be determinant to know a bit at what sauce we will be cooked, and also what will be the driving priorities of the leading political forces in place. So of course a lot of uncertainty, but still we are all allowed to dream and to have some wishes for this new policy mandate. And as we are reaching the end of our webinar, I wanted to have a final question for all of you. We have this INI report which is on our desk in the Parliament, and very often but it's just an INI report, and it's the end of a mandate, so what for? And so that would be my question to you. What do you hope to see as a result of this INI report, in the next policy mandate, do you want a geothermal strategy? Do you want a heating and cooling strategy? Do you want both, a geothermal fund? I mean, what from your perspective would be the most appropriate action from the European Union in the next mandate to promote geothermal district heating and cooling? Asbjørn, can I start with you?
Yes, of course you can. I hope that it is true that this INI report is just before the current parliament is on its way to election campaigns. But I hope it's very timely, because I think that Matthew and others has to do a lot of thinking about preparing the working program for the next commission. And I hope that geothermal could play a role there, and that we could look into some of the barriers and issues that we've been talking about today. It's all good for me if it's part of a larger perspective on heating as such, on the challenge that we use 50% of our energy, as you started, Aurélie, on heating and cooling, and that's still, at least to my knowledge, 60% of it is based on fossil fuels. But I also see that geothermal has been sort of the forgotten amongst different renewable energy sources, and therefore it requires a little extra care if it's put into a larger strategic framework. But I really hope that this could be the starting point for something that the new parliament and the new commission could look carefully into. Thanks.
Thank you, Asbjørn. Philippe?
Yes, thank you, Aurélie. Just to be brief, I will distinguish probably what was mentioned also by Jakob. We need a level playing field, and maybe here indeed, as mentioned already, heat strategy could be the solution for that. But we should not confuse with what we need in geothermal. We need an alliance, we need an industrial strategy. Why? We are speaking about a technology which today has 2 to 3%, and we want to not remain a niche market, to be a mass market. And we are able to make it. And we see the current growth rate all over Europe is booming, all over Europe, geothermal development. But for that, we need a strategy. We need to be sure the supply chain will be there. We need to be sure that the people will, the skills will be there, the workforce will be there, the permitting authorities will have enough capacity to deliver the permitting in time. Because when you have an exponential growth, it's all the issue you are facing. We have seen that, for example, in geothermal heat pumps in Germany. The market has 100% growth rate. It means that last year you had to wait 10 months to have a drill house for your geothermal heat pump. Because it's the issue you have when an exponential growth. And if we don't have to have these barriers for developing our technology, we need to have a strategy. We need to be sure the supply chain is made in Europe. We need to be sure we don't have issue with critical materials. We need to be sure that the workforce is skilled and so on. So indeed, it's true for geothermal. It may be true also for the district heating sector. It will be true for other renewable sectors like solar thermal, like bioenergy. We need industrial strategy, sectorial, because we need to be sure the supply chain and the workforce will be there. But that is different, but we need a level playing field and its strategy.
Yes, thank you, Philippe. Indeed, one thing that we share, whether it's the geothermal industry or the district heating and cooling industry, we are European industrial champions, European industrial flagships, and we want to remain so. And we want to make sure that there is this value chain approach to our future deployment. Thanks for reminding that. Lorraine, what would you wish for also as a follow-up to the INI report and in the frame of the next mandate?
Completely agree on the skill shortage or skills we need, the drilling suppliers bottlenecks also, and what we would wish is that you could make member states replicate the risk mitigation support like the insurance scheme.
Thank you. Straight to the point, but very important. And the last but not least, Jakob.
I think dissolve the bureaucratic burden. It's very important. Also, if we are talking about heat, boost local energy opportunities. Heat cannot be transported like electricity, and also boost district heating. It's a great technology. So whereas people with heat pumps in their houses have to think about renovation to make it workable, we can tell our district heating customers, please enjoy your life. We care about the rest. So because we are responsible for the decarbonization, and you know, geothermal energy as well as district heating is the solution for a lot of problems if we're talking about targets for 2050. You're muted.
Indeed, thank you again, 2023. Yes, I think that Mathieu, you have a very clear wish list. Probably, I mean, there are a lot of other aspects which were touched upon. The role of large heat pumps, the role of industrial policies. There were quite some questions in the chat with regards to also the impact of electricity prices on the use of heat pump to produce. I think one aspect to that is a question that you mentioned, though, also on system integration, how we can better make sure that the incentives are also tackling the reinforcement of the synergies between sectors and between technologies. So with regards to energy prices, with regards to energy taxation in general, how do we make it attractive? How do we de-risk those projects? How do we strengthen our industrial value chain? We hope to see a lot of that in the frame of the future mandate. And Mathieu, we count on you to bring those messages to your colleagues, and we thank you very much as well for coming to participate to this discussion with us. So with that, thanks a lot to all our panelists. It was a very insightful conversation. It's just the beginning, because we know we will be continuing this in the next months and years. We had a lot of extra questions in the audience, which we will share with the panelists later, so we can see if we can send you some written answers to some of the unanswered questions on the chat. And with that, thank you very much to everyone. Have a wonderful day, and I hope you learned today as I did. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.